Welcome to the Springs in the Desert podcast. We're those friends that you can take with you wherever you are on the path of infertility. Hello, and welcome back to the Springs in the Desert podcast. We're so glad you're here with us. It's an honor to walk with you wherever you are on the path of infertility. I'm Jillian from the Springs in the Desert team, and today I'm joined by my teammate and founding mama, Anne. How are you doing?
Hey, Jillian, doing great.
That's so good. I'm so glad to be here with you today. We have a very special guest joining us once again, Victoria Cerise. How are you today, Victoria?
I'm doing amazing. Thank you so much for having me on again.
We are so glad you are here.
Yeah.
If you weren't able to listen to the previous episode with Victoria, I just encourage you to pause this episode, jump back to that one, and take a listen before you pick this one up so you can get to know her a little bit more and learn about her heart a bit. But a brief recap, Victoria is a photographer who spends a lot of time chatting about Catholic dating and marriage prep and the sacrament of marriage. And so, Victoria, I just want to dive right in. Why is that topic, it's a beautiful topic and very worthy of talking about, but why is that topic something that's near to your heart? Where did that come from?
Yeah, of course. So, of course, preparing for marriage is like something so important for me, to me, for several reasons. I am in the wedding industry, so I can see how much focus gets put on the actual wedding day. And there's nothing wrong with that, of course. Like, the wedding day is beautiful. There is a lot of time and preparation that needs to be put in it. But it is so important to me that couples also focus on preparing for marriage more deeply because, of course, the sacrament of matrimony is so beautiful, but marriage itself is your lifelong vocation that you will be journeying on with your spouse. And there's so much beauty in that, but there is also so much preparation within your dating engagement. And then obviously in throughout your marriage as well to be put towards that. So it's just important to me. I love talking about it, especially as someone who is married. And I just love to share knowledge with people that I almost wish I heard more of during my engagement. So yeah, that's what I love about it.
That's so good to pass on. Yeah, that advice and wisdom that you wish you would have gotten. That's a gift to a lot of people. Yeah, our team and also in the community, we talk a lot about how parishes and dioceses, kind of structure their marriage prep. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering if maybe you have some thoughts about how what are some conversations that maybe aren't happening right now in marriage prep that would be helpful and beneficial to couples that should be included? Yeah, what should be talked more about in marriage prep?
Yeah, of course. So I think marriage prep is a beautiful season. And I think that there's so much that needs to be talked about. And depending on how long of an engagement you have, it's kind of hard to jam pack everything together, but there's a lot of important topics and some pretty raw topics to talk about in marriage prep. So of course, talking about maybe past traumas, childhood, of course, raising children, finances and stuff like that. But one thing I really want to kind of dive in today is talking about how infertility kind of gets put on the back burner of marriage prep. I feel at least in my experience, I'm not sure about everybody else. And it's kind of unfortunate, especially because infertility is becoming, unfortunately, something that is more common. There's a lot of couples going through infertility, and especially within the Catholic world, you almost feel a little bit like an outcast when you're going through infertility. Mm-hmm. I was talking to a friend actually not that long ago, and she's not going through infertility, but I was just talking to her about how sometimes I feel I can be less than as a Catholic because of infertility. And she was just but you're not. And I was okay, yes, that's seems so obvious, but in your mind, you're just oh, it's so hard to remember that objectively, yes, I'm not less as a Catholic, but it's important to hear that from people. And hearing it from her was oh, this is so nice to hear. It's kind of that validation. So that's kind of what I'm definitely really passionate about. And I think that it should be talked about more.
That I agree. We agree. A resounding amen to
definitely.
That. Anne has spent some time working at the diocesan level and in marriage prep, right? Isn't that right, Anne?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, Anne, actually, if what was your experience like in that marriage prep? Like, was infertility part of any of that preparation, or were you able to, or maybe it wasn't even on your mind at that time, or just, what was that like for you?
Yeah, what's interesting is that when I started working in the family life office in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, marriage prep was my responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And that was right after I got out of grad school, and I was not married. So for the first, I think, 5 years of being assistant director of family life and doing marriage prep, I was a single woman. So I had this vision of what marriage prep should be, our office did. And of course, it was all the things, Victoria, that you said about really talking about what the sacrament is, what it means to be married, what it means to be married in Christ, and all of that. But infertility is not something that came up. And even after I was married and we started going through it, it didn't seem to be part of the program, because it seems to me as if in many marriage prep programs, there's such an emphasis on helping couples in a way to see that they don't have to have children right away. So, we live in this culture, even though we're Catholic, we breathe this air of like, take your time, be married for however long, get to know each other, do things together, and put off children. And I think sometimes the way that marriage preparation is approached, even in Catholic marriage prep, is like emphasis on NFP and being able to postpone pregnancy. So it's almost like we come on defense, like we know that you're going to be resistant to wanting to have children right away. And I think this is a totally unconscious thing. I don't think it's something that we think about and say, this is how we have to do it. But I think it's just a function of being a part of this culture. And so NFP is a good thing, and it's better for you, in terms of your health than any other kind of contraceptive, of course. But I think oftentimes we come at it from that standpoint of like, let's almost reinforce how you can postpone thinking about pregnancy in a illicit way. And I think there's a number of problems with that. But one of them is that if someone ends up having fertility issues, perhaps they won't even discover them right away. And I'm just someone who, having done marriage prep for so many years, I really believe that this is a time to kind of change the conversation and look at how we talk about fertility and fruitfulness as a whole, to talk about that differently in marriage prep.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because I think it's so true that, of course, we believe that we are made in the image and likeness of God and we are good. And so it's always best to assume the best of others, that no one is trying to intentionally forget those who are struggling with infertility, but that we have a gift and perhaps even a duty in some cases to shed light on the fact that there's perhaps a group of people that aren't being served in those marriage prep processes. And I really resonate with your comments about how NFP, a lot of the conversation is typically about avoiding and postponing. And I didn't realize that that's what was happening for a while. I was getting really frustrated in some of the conversations because I couldn't relate. I didn't understand why everyone was trying to avoid, or that, they were using it to avoid. And I thought, wait, though. This can also be used to help you achieve. It's telling you exactly when, or, hopefully pretty close to when you are fertile. And I was struggling to figure out until I realized that they're forgetting that there's, groups of people who really would like to achieve, and they're trying to use it for that purpose. And so I love what you said, that there's no time such as the present to change the conversation, and to, God created us for this time. And so we can, if we're in that position, we can do that.
Yeah. And Victoria, I wonder what you think about this too. Even some of the language that we use around avoiding pregnancy and especially that word achieving pregnancy. You know, you mentioned how sometimes in the Catholic space, when you're struggling with infertility, you can feel really less than, like you don't measure up. And so whenever I hear that phrase, achieve pregnancy, it always makes me kind of, you know, stop in my tracks a little bit because then I can feel like, oh, like I am a failure because I can't achieve.
Yeah, that's so true. And, you know, I think that just from like a Catholic perspective, you know, you think of like the Catholic family and you think of like the, you know, 15 passenger vans or something like that. And you think of all the people who are, you know, they talk about motherhood and the beauty of it. And it is beautiful. And just like what it means to be like a Catholic wife and mother, but it like, they kind of like join the two together. And so it feels like if you're not a Catholic mother as well, you're not really like that important, you know? And I know that that's not what it, you know, their intention is or what anyone's intention is, but it's like, you kind of feel forgotten and you kind of are in this weird space of like, you can't really connect to, like, I mean, you can obviously to an extent connect to people who are single, but you can't fully connect with them because you are married. And then you can't really connect with a lot of the other Catholic wives because, you know, all of the conversation is around children and like pregnancy and stuff like that. So it's this weird middle space to be in, and especially in Catholic circles, because I just feel like there's always another pregnancy, there's always another crying baby in the church and everything, and that's not bad, of course, but it's constantly like a reminder.
Yeah, you know, Victoria, this is reminding me a little bit of an episode that we listened to that I believe you're a co-host of for the Catholic Marriage podcast. There was an episode recently about adoption. And I'm just curious if you would be willing to share some thoughts about, no matter what, there's so many crosses that we're given in marriage. And, you know, for this conversation about infertility, do you have any thoughts about how we could be better equipped to carry some of these crosses that we're given, or opportunities? You know, perhaps God is calling someone to foster or adopt.
Yeah, of course. So I think that, you know, in all marriages, there is some sort of like suffering that we're faced with. So I think that during marriage prep, and it might not be infertility for some people, it might be like the loss of a job or financial hardships or illness, like whatever it may be. So I think talking about that almost like in kind of a raw sense that there, you know, there is suffering within marriage, but you can still suffer joyfully and work through it. I think almost providing like some great tangible like advice for this, like the couple who is going to suffer at one point in their marriage, and kind of open that conversation. Even like, I like how you, Anne, are like kind of helping with like marriage prep and like having people who have been through different types of suffering. I think that is so helpful because even if, you know, when you're in marriage prep, like you never think it's going to be you, right? Unless you already kind of know, but like for the most part, most people, like I've mentioned before, you don't think that like infertility is going to be like the thing that you're going to have to go through. So, but having someone as like a resource that you can look back on and be like, hey, she's been through it. She can help me through this. I think that is super helpful. And also just people like sharing kind of their stories, infertility, adoption, all those kinds of things. I feel like they're not talked about that much in general amongst Catholics, unfortunately. And I think that's kind of one of the major benefits of what you guys are doing here is kind of sharing the stories, opening the conversation about, you know, what this really is, and just being willing to like serve couples who are going through kind of any hardship. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but just kind of being totally open and like willing to help each other, I think is really helpful.
Yeah. And I think I'm sorry, Jillian, I think it also goes to what we try to talk about in this sort of broader understanding of fruitfulness, and that our fruitfulness isn't exhausted in having biological or adoptive children. Right. But that there are so many other ways that even if we do have children, it's not like we didn't punch our fruitfulness quota card and then we're done. Like we're called in our marriage to continue to give life and to cooperate with God in co-creating, in a number of ways. And I feel like that is not something that is really talked about in marriage prep, or not in a lot of the marriage prep programs that I've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. Like even talking about like spiritual motherhood, like the gifts that you have. And I think something that I've heard a lot about is, from those who are mothers, sometimes they can get lost in that identity of motherhood, and they forget that they're also still like a daughter of God. They have gifts that they can use to serve not only their children, and their husband, but others as well. And that is something that, we shouldn't be lost upon us, no matter, if you're like a biological mother, or if you are suffering through infertility, whatever it may be, like, that's something that I definitely have dealt with too, is like, you almost get lost in, like, for me, like, I guess the ideal of motherhood is like that, wanting that, you can almost kind of make that an idol or your identity is infertility, which is not. And you can get very much lost in that, no matter which angle you're coming from. So I think talking about that within marriage prep would be really helpful, talking about like using your gifts to serve God, no matter what stage in life you're in.
Yeah, I love that because it's applicable to everyone, and, everyone who's present at marriage prep. And,
right.
You had shared this in the previous episode that we were chatting with you, but that, one, it is really good to discern who and when you share, your struggles with. That's absolutely true. And on the other hand, if there is someone who feels that they are in a place where they can share a little bit more, maybe a little bit more publicly, or maybe an option for them could be to call their diocese or their parish and say, hey, we have struggled with infertility, or we have an idea that maybe we'd be willing to give a talk at a marriage prep retreat if you'd be willing to have us, or could I just talk to someone about including this in marriage prep because we didn't quite feel prepared and maybe others would benefit from this. And of course, that's not going to be not everyone is going to be at a place to be able to do that. And that's totally fine. But maybe there are some who'd be able to kind of be part of that process to help those who have not yet experienced it, but will. And also to help others. I think it's just so good to help other people understand what it is that those who have infertility are going through. So yeah, I appreciate that. We just got to talk about it. We just got to talk about it and not, leave it in the dark.
Yeah, I think for me, like, ever since I kind of started talking more about my infertility, I've had so many people reach out to me and like, I didn't have any idea that they were going through it too. Obviously you don't know like what everyone else is like going through, and you're not necessarily always thinking about everybody else. You're thinking about your own life, and you don't even realize that so many people are like suffering in silence. And I think it really can be beneficial to talk, but not everybody is really called to that. So I definitely recommend to like prayerfully discern how much to open up and like how much to open up your heart, because you are opening your heart up for some harshness as well. So,
but one thing I was thinking is that, if you are out there and not thinking you are called to volunteer for marriage prep and talk about this, means send this episode along to your pastor, to the family life office in your diocese, or a couple of the episodes, Victoria, on your podcast where you discussed it. Send it off to them and say, hey, listen to this, or send them our way to Springs in the Desert, and like, we'll talk to them and we'll sort of let them know. Because I think we do have to start informing this conversation.
Right. I know for me, like my marriage prep, and this is like no shame at all to like our priest or anything like that. He's a great priest, but most of my marriage prep was very much about like kind of the primary reason for marriage is just, the having and raising of children, getting them to heaven. It was all pretty much most of our conversations were about that. We talked about obviously contraception, discipline, like raising children, those kinds of things, which is all good. But I can almost look back with my marriage prep and be like a little sorrowful because I can't really apply most of this stuff to like the season in life that I'm in right now. And I think that is something a lot of people can relate to if they're on this path of infertility, that, you look back and you're like, I can't really, I mean, obviously there's, good in all of it. And I wouldn't say it's a waste, but it's just like, I can't really apply a lot of this, like at least right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate, Anne, your suggestion of passing on this podcast or any podcast that you think, hey, my pastor or my aunt or my husband and I could listen to this together, or
Right.
to just share this because sometimes these conversations are difficult to have and it's hard to find the words to express. And so if any of these podcasts are helpful to start that conversation, that is such a good suggestion. Because the other thing is that, family life ministers and pastors, they're there to serve and father and minister to you. They're there for you. And so are we at Springs in the Desert. We're here to serve you, and to bring those desires and suggestions are really so helpful. It might be a little bit scary. So hopefully that's such a good idea to send the podcast and get that conversation started.
Yeah. And so often I think our pastors or even sometimes people at the diocese, they either don't know or they don't have the tools. Or, I mean, I know from having worked in a diocese, there's so much going on and you're usually doing it all on a shoestring, with a very, very tight staff. And so, I think that they would appreciate those kinds of suggestions. And especially if there's, anyone who feels like they would like to volunteer. What a beautiful way of fruitfulness that is too, is to give your time, once a year, even, to speak at a marriage prep and like witness to your marriage. Like what a beautiful way to witness to your marriage, even though it doesn't look like what we've been talking about is that sort of picture perfect Catholic family. Like what a beautiful way to witness to how even through suffering, we can bring Christ into the world and we can have a beautiful marriage.
Right.
Yes.
And like I mentioned before, I think a lot of marriage prep is obviously talked about like the primary reason for marriage, but there's also like the secondary reason for marriage, which is like the mutual love and support, helping each other get to heaven. And I think by showing that like your marriage is still so beautiful, like no matter what you go through, and you will go through something, no matter what it is, you will get through it, as long as you really like look to heaven and strive toward it, walk toward it together. And it can be so beautiful. So I think it's like, it would be awesome to have some sort of talk and really just show a couple, like if you feel called toward it, like that this is still a beautiful marriage, even if it doesn't look exactly like how you thought it would.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are just about out of time, but Victoria, I want to just kind of ask to give our listeners some hope. Many of them are already married, so they've already gone through this marriage prep process. And so I'm wondering, and even with our conversation about photography that we had a while ago, that perhaps there are some situations that didn't quite go the way that they were hoping, or they didn't get that preparation that they were hoping to have. And so, what are some ways that they might be able to work through that to kind of have some redemption of those experiences, so that the memory of marriage prep or the memory of the photographer, the memories of those aren't about what didn't go right, but the beauty of it, that is for the good of the spouse.
Yeah, of course. So I think we kind of already touched on it, but like kind of what I said before, I love, sharing advice and tips with people that like I almost wish I had, when I was going through it. So that's kind of like what I really think you guys are doing here in the podcast, like helping to support women who are on this path. And you're probably providing this resource that you almost wish you had, maybe years ago, or
yes,
for yourself.
That's exactly what we're doing.
Even within my podcast, I can, so many people are like, oh, I'm so glad that I have this. And I'm like, I wish I had this when I was, engaged. So I think there's a lot of beauty and like hope and redemption in like almost looking to serve other people who are going through marriage prep. They're on this path, or they're maybe in the very beginning stages of infertility, and like being able to lend a hand and help them and walk them through and say, I'm here for you. I feel like you can find so much redemption in like looking to serve your fellow Catholics. That's honestly the best way that I think you can, because when you look back and, like I said, I look back with some sorrow at some of our marriage prep, but, looking back, it's like, I don't necessarily think that having talking about it more would have necessarily taken away any of the pain. I think it would have helped equip me a little bit, of course. And I still think it's very important to talk about it, but I don't think it would have taken away the pain. I think one of the things that I could have probably used the most was just having someone who's been through it and can, maybe a little bit ahead of me and just it's going to be okay. It's still going to be so beautiful. And, that's kind of what I wish I would have had. So that's kind of what I hope to be for someone else.
Yeah.
Oh, Victoria, thank you so much for sharing your heart and your gifts and your thoughts about this. It's such an important topic. And listeners, I know that some of these conversations can be sometimes tricky to hear and to process and to might even bring up some grieving, but just know that we're here for you. We're walking with you. It's an honor. It really is such an honor and a privilege to walk with you. Victoria, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
I want to put a little plug in for your podcast because you have so many good conversations. So could you tell our viewers where we could find you?
Yeah, of course. So I have a podcast called the Catholic Wedding Podcast. I co-host it with my friend Jo. She's a Catholic wedding videographer and I'm a Catholic wedding photographer. So we have guests come on it and talk all about preparing for marriage, preparing for your wedding day. Of course, a lot of our topics are geared towards Catholic brides, but we are also talking about some more marriage related topics on there too. I've shared a little bit about my story within infertility. And as you mentioned, we also did talk about adoption as well on the podcast. And we'll continue to talk about different, marriage related topics as well. So I definitely, recommend if you know anyone, if you are engaged yourself, but if you know anyone who is getting married, definitely share that podcast with them. I also have a Facebook group called The Catholic Bride. And that is a great community for ladies who are preparing for, wedding days and for their marriage as well. And then you can find me on Instagram. My handle is Mystical Rose Photography. And then my personal Instagram is a look through my lens. A look through my eyes, sorry.
Thank you so much, Victoria.
Awesome.
I'm looking forward to sharing this with our community and they can check you out a little bit more. Listeners, we hope this conversation has been encouraging to you. It's certainly been encouraging to me. And thank you so much for tuning in. We can't wait to see you next time. It's an honor to walk with you. God bless you. Thank you so much for joining us for this Springs in the Desert podcast episode. We would be so grateful if you took a minute to rate and review us so that we can reach more listeners. Don't forget to check out our social media pages on Facebook and Instagram and go to our website, springsinthedesert.org, where you can sign up for our newsletter and community prayer list, read our blog, and register for virtual and in-person events. Most importantly, remember that God loves you so much, and so do we.